If you lived in Des Moines, Iowa in September of 1982 and you did not receive a newspaper, it's probably because the paper boy was abducted. This is one of the strangest cases for a missing person, and I should say missing people, because there were 3 of them. My name is Berton Moran, and this is the strange case of what happened to Johnny Gosch. So I actually came across this case whenever I was doing research for a different video, the duct tape killer, Robert Leroy Anderson. I found out that he was born and raised in Council Bluff, Iowa. So I had this idea that maybe I should look into Iowa missing people cases around that time to see if there was a possibility that his missing people cases could have started at an earlier year. But what I came across was one of the most interesting and honestly a very huge case that I don't really remember hearing about. On September 5th of 1982, Johnny Gosch got up early before the sunrise to start his paper route. Usually he was accompanied by his father, John David Gosch, but for some unknown reason, Johnny decided to start early that morning by himself. At around 7:45 that morning, the Gosch household would receive a phone call, and it was one of their neighbors who was kind of upset that they had not yet received their morning newspaper. Johnny's father, figured that he will go out and help Johnny finish his paper route because even though he's still out working, he should have been done by now. But it did not take long for John to come across Johnny's red wagon that was full of newspapers he used to carry behind him to throw the newspapers, and his small dog, but there was no sign of Johnny. John hurried back to his house, told his wife Noreen, call the cops, Johnny's missing. Noreen, she did call the police, but this is where things start to get strange rather quickly. Keep in mind that in 1982, we did not have the laws that we do now, especially with missing children, and this case turned out to be one of the reasons that we have such quicker laws when it comes to missing cases nowadays. And it's because of this that since the police did not receive a ransom note or any kind of indication that his abductors would have wanted payment, they kind of brushed it off as Johnny ran away. The police told the Gosch family that they could wait the 72 hours and then report him as a missing person, and then they would begin to search for him. Now, this is a side note that I have watched an interview later on with one of the police detectives, I believe it might have been the chief of police at the time, who said that there was no crime scene, he just vanished. Side note, I never understood why the law was ever 72 hours on missing people cases. And I get that you don't want to waste the manpower to only have turn out that some random person that they thought was missing was actually just over at their friend's house having a barbecue and he didn't tell his family about it. You know, that kind of situation I understand. But 72 hours is still a really long time for somebody to be missing, especially since the first 48 hours of most crimes is the more, it's more the time you're going to find out more real evidence or solve the crime. Hence the show, The First 48, because after 48 hours, the chances of solving that crime reduce substantially. But okay, yeah, that's it for my rant. Whenever the police actually started looking into this case, things started to get strange really quickly. Many other paper boys working the same area claimed to have seen Johnny talking with a man in a blue Ford Fairmont at around 6 a.m. According to Iowa Cold Cases, Noreen Gosch would later detail information that she got from one of the people that claimed to have witnessed Johnny talking to this man. And she says, the guy shut off his engine, opened his passenger door, and swung his feet out on the curb right where the boys were assembling their newspapers. She said the man asked her son for directions, and the young Gosch started walking away after he was talking to him. Noreen continued, The man pulled his door shut and started up the engine, but before he left, he reached up and flicked the dome light 3 times. She believed he was signaling to another man, who then came out from between the 2 houses and began following Johnny. Now, John and Noreen, they made multiple television appearances, and they distributed over 10,000 copies, flyers with their son's face on them, with all the information to who to get a hold of. And she never gave up looking for Johnny, and she would call the police multiple times for any kind of update. In fact, she pushed so hard that it led to a lot of the police being asked to be taken off of the Johnny Gosch missing person case. Another side note, I don't blame her for pushing so hard. Her son is missing, and it seemed like, for the most part, police were doing jack shit to help. And I mean that in the nicest fucking way possible. Noreen insisted that the chief of police, Orville Cooney, at one point stood on top of a park bench with a bullhorn, and he told a crowd of locals who were searching for Johnny, "You need to stop. He's just a runaway." Now, 2 years later, when a 13-year-old boy named Eugene Martin vanished while delivering newspapers just 12 miles from where Johnny disappeared, this pushed Johnny's story even further. One of Martin's relatives actually worked at the Anderson and Erickson Dairy, and he later asked the company if they could put Eugene and Johnny and other missing kids from the area on the milk cartons that they distributed. And the company actually agreed to do this, and eventually this became a nationwide thing, which I always thought was kind of neat, because you remember seeing back in the day, have you seen this person on the side of the milk carton? And this is the case that started that whole thing. And since the milk carton thing did go nationwide, it actually led to a lot of unconfirmed sightings of Johnny. In 1983, one report was made by a woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who said that a young man ran up to her in the middle of a mall and said, "Please, lady, you have to help me. My name is John David Gosch." But before she could even react, 2 men came and dragged the young man away. 2 years later, in 1985, a woman in Sioux City, Iowa, received $1 in her change back at the grocery store that said, "I am alive," signed Johnny Gosch. And this bill was actually looked at by 3 handwriting specialists who confirmed that it was in fact that of Johnny Gosch. One of the biggest theories with this entire case is that Johnny was sold into a sex slave business orchestrated by higher ups in the government in the area. And if you remember how little the police actually seemed to help back then, and especially in this case, it actually is a big possibility. But now we get to the point of the case that just takes the biggest unexpected turn, when Johnny comes back. In 1997, Noreen Gosch gets a knock on her door at 2:30 a.m. She opens the door and sees a strange man standing with her then 27-year-old son, Johnny. Johnny would open his shirt to reveal a birthmark and confirm that it was in fact Johnny. The 2 men then came inside of Noreen's home, and they spoke for over an hour. Noreen later told the Des Moines Register, and I'm going to read it word for word. "He was with another man, but I have no idea who the other person was. Johnny would look over to the other person for approval to speak. He didn't say where he was living or where he was going." Now, according to Noreen, whenever Johnny left that night or that morning, he asked her specifically to not mention him showing up, do not tell the police, and that was for not only his safety, but her safety as well. Noreen says that he was, in fact, kidnapped and sold in to a sex slave ring. Noreen Gosch is dismissed as a grieving mother who is driven to outlandish conclusions and stories because she's a grieving mother who's upset about her missing son. But that doesn't change the fact that her determination in finding Johnny led to making sure that future missing children cases were looked at with a lot more urgency. In 1984, Iowa passed the Johnny Gosch bill, which required police to look into missing children cases immediately instead of waiting the 72 hours. Now, though Johnny was never officially found, and we don't know where he is today, his story and his legacy as the milk carton kids, one of the first ones, has saved countless kids from his fate. Now I would like to point out that recently, and this is another side note, people have said that the milk carton kids, posting the pictures on there, it only ever really led to saving one child and ultimately was deemed a failure of an idea. But in my own opinion, you saved one kid, then it was a success. It doesn't have to work 100%. But to me, even if it just saved one kid, it's successful. This strange case does get even weirder when you just look at the timeline of whenever these cases started. In 1982, we have 12-year-old paperboy Johnny Gosch vanishes. In 1984, we have Eugene Martin, paperboy, vanishes. And often overlooked, in 1986, we have Mark James Warren Allen, who vanished on his way to a friend's house. The police in the area claim that Mark Allen's case didn't line up with the other two missing boys from Des Moines from the previous 2 years and 2 years before that, because he was not a paperboy. Now, this entire case does scream a cover-up to me. I just find it weird that the police didn't really want to help too much in this whole thing. And I know that the laws have changed since then, but it still seems very weird, especially with the Johnny coming back and speaking with his mother and telling her what he experienced. I will be visiting Des Moines in September. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.